I'm still seeing people coming in, so we'll start in just a moment. Get started. So welcome to our fifth and final session of our professional development for educational technicians. We have on the page where you registered, there are links to the videos for the other 4 sessions around challenging behavior, 3 sessions around challenging behavior, and then a session around active supervision in the classroom. So if you have not had a chance to see those videos and you want to do that, they are located on the website for you, and this one will be up in the next day or 2. And this is our final session. And today we're going to be talking about a brief overview of the class observation tool. I'm going to have Nicole go ahead and mute everybody who is here, and I'll unmute myself just so we can hear, so everybody can hear. And then she's going to be manning the chat room. So as any questions come in, she'll make those known, or if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and just ask also. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to the overview of the class observation tool. Next slide, please. So the class stands for Classroom Assessment Scoring System. It's an observation tool that focuses on the effectiveness of classroom interactions between teachers and children. So these daily interactions that promote children's social and cognitive development. Children thrive in a classroom when teachers create a nurturing, well-managed settings and provide frequent and engaging opportunities. This was a training that we chose to provide today because CLASS is the tool that the Department of Education uses in its pre-K monitoring program. It also is a really good tool that informs us of the importance of interactions in a quality pre-K classroom, or a quality classroom in general. If you're not in pre-K, this can also be very helpful. This is a brief introduction to the observation tool. So if you have questions or need anything more focused after this, feel free to reach out via email. There's a lot of information around CLASS, so we're not going to get to all of it today. Again, this is just going to be a brief overview. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what CLASS scores are. Class observations are completed and scored by trained and certified reliable classroom observers. There is a test once a year that we have to take to continue our reliability in order to do class observations. There are 4 20-minute observation periods during one classroom day, and following that, observers rate each dimension on a 7-point scale as follows. Scores of 1 to 2 are indicative of the low range. Interactions that are lacking, teaching is rote, and there's poor behavior management shown in the classroom. Scores of 3, 4, and 5 are indicative of the mid-range, where there's a mix of effective interactions and periods of time where interactions are absent. And then scores of 6 and 7 are indicating the high range, where interactions are effective and consistently observed throughout the observation period. So let's look at what the CLASS tool measures. CLASS is made up of the following 3 broad domains around effective and positive teacher and child interaction. The first domain is emotional support. This refers to specific teaching practices that assist with the development of warm and supportive relationships, enjoyment of experiences and excitement of learning, feelings of comfort in the classroom, and opportunities for appropriate levels of independence and autonomy for children in the classroom. The second domain is classroom organization. This domain describes teaching practices that support children in developing skills around behavior regulation and gets enabling them to get the most out of learning each day and engagement in activities. And the third domain is instructional support, which is looking at teaching practices specific to language and vocabulary growth and cognitive development in children. So each of these three domains, emotional support, classroom organization, and instructional support, encompass dimensions which capture specific details around the child and teacher interactions that are observed. So we're going to explore a little bit around each one of these domains. So domain number one, emotional support, and the dimensions in domain number one are positive climate, negative climate, teacher sensitivity, and regard for student perspective. So what does this look like in a classroom if you have strong emotional support? What does this look like in a classy classroom? So in a classroom that is high scoring on a class scale, you see a lot of playing and engagement with children, with teachers and adults down at their level, a lot of shared smiles and laughter, a lot of positive affect that is shared back and forth between the children and the adults, warm, calm voices of adults and children, awareness of children's emotion, and also discussing those emotions, helping resolve problems as needed, and remembering that when you're meeting a child where they're at, they all need a different level of guidance. So it's around giving them guidance and supports that they might need, whether it's actual language around something or actual just brief reminders of strategies. Encouraging children's talk in the classroom, which helps with engagement and further learning. Giving children choices and responsibilities in the classroom, which is giving them autonomy, giving them responsibilities where they can lead a circle time or jobs that we may give out, light flicker, line leader, those sort of things. And then incorporating and using children's ideas in their play. Domain number two is classroom organization. There are three dimensions here, I believe. They include behavior management, productivity, and instructional learning formats. So what does positive behavior management look like in a classy classroom? It's consistently reinforcing rules and expectations, redirection of undesired behaviors, praising positive behaviors, positive interactions with children. That's letting children know what they should be doing as opposed to saying no or telling them what they should not be doing. Transitions that are brief and organized, transitions that are clearly planned so that wait times are minimal. It's hard when you're 4 or 5 years old to have a long wait time and wait for 15 other children to do a task before you get a turn, or watching everybody else do that. And also transitions that have clear expectations and directions, and then giving children clear instructions throughout the day. A lot of that is going back to our 3 previous sessions on challenging behavior and being proactive around that, with positive redirection and praise. And domain 3 is instructional support, which includes concept development, quality of feedback, and language modeling. And so what does this look like in a classy classroom for effective instructional support? We're asking children open-ended questions, such things as, how do you think that happened? What do you think will happen next? Why? We're drawing out their learning experiences and expanding on that to give them time to think through the process of whatever the activity is that they're doing. Asking children to explain their thinking also is the same thing, engaging them, elongating their learning and drawing things out, listening to their answers and not just saying, yep, great. Listening to them, responding to them, maybe giving them a question that furthers their learning, reminding children about previous learning. So we're integrating with maybe stories that we've read. We're reminding them about things we've learned in the past, which also helps them make those connections. relating topics to children's lives outside the classroom. So the homeschool connection is really huge. Relating whatever they're doing to, maybe you went to the zoo, maybe you did this, maybe you did that outside the classroom, which also if you have a grocery store and dramatic play, you're talking about, going to the grocery store with parents or family members, that sort of thing. Giving specific praise on projects and work that the children are doing is not just saying, oh, that's really pretty, that's really beautiful. It's saying, I love that you mixed your colors, look what you've done here, I really enjoy, how did you get to this step, that sort of thing. Offering hints and a little help when needed, so that would be scaffolding. We do a lot with letter sounds. We do a lot of that with when children are at a point where they just don't know how to move forward in their learning or in their work. Little hints or little scaffolding is very helpful. And then using lots of rich vocabulary. And so people often think that vocabulary with children in pre-K is not, knowing it's important. There are a lot of words that may be too big for children in pre-K. What we should be doing is using those words and then giving brief explanations. So you could say, he was sprinting across the grass. And do you know that sprinting means that he was running as fast as he could? So you're not just giving them the word, you're giving them the meaning of that word as well.
Perfect. Can I jump in real quick, Marcy?
Yes, please.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. This is Nicole Medora. I just have my video off. I just wanted to reiterate some of the things that Marcy has brought to our attention here. So in the beginning, she mentioned that this tool is one that we use at the Department of Education when we monitor our public pre-K programs. And I just wanted to sort of highlight that this tool is really meant to be used in a regular ed setting. I know a lot of you that are attending today or perhaps watching this later are coming from a special purpose setting, and this isn't something that we use there, primarily because, so Marcy was mentioning like the various dimensions and domains that this tool looks at. So for example, back in positive climate or in teacher sensitivity, when that's looking at when the teacher is interacting with the child and acknowledging what they're doing. And in special purpose settings or with children with specific needs or specific goals, sometimes it's purposeful for us to be ignorant of what they're doing. So this tool doesn't really lend itself to that type of an environment or that setting because it just looks so different. Sometimes one-on-one aides or Title I ed techs or special purpose classroom teachers are behaving and interacting in a way with the child that is very specific and intentional to get an expected behavior or an expected response from that child. And sometimes those actions are not what we would typically see in a typical developing classroom. So I just wanted to highlight that for those of you that might be coming from the special ed lens. This isn't something we would use in that setting. I do believe that the Frank Porter Graham Center out of, oh goodness, is it North Carolina? Is developing a tool that would or could be used in a special ed setting. But this just isn't one of them. And also I wanted to reiterate as well that because we use this in public pre-K classrooms and it looks at the specific interactions between adults and children, that includes all adults, not just the lead teachers in that room. So often, and it is not uncommon, we'll go into a public pre-K classroom, and we'll notice right out of the gate that a student or a group of students has a very strong relationship with the ed tech in that room, or with the woman who delivers the breakfast cart, or with the woman who comes down, or the man that comes down to do something in the classroom periodically. Those interactions matter 100%. And if we're in the classroom observing those interactions, what we notice and what we hear from those is going to count towards evidence of any one of these domains, wherever it may fit. So I didn't want any of you to think for a second that if you're in a setting that's having a class observation, be it a Head Start or public pre-K or a child care center, your interactions matter. You know, we've talked in the last 4 sessions around interacting with children, specifically with challenging behaviors, and that is very important here as well as interactions with students who aren't displaying challenging behaviors and the importance that that has as well. So I have the chat box open in front of me, so definitely please comment here. I do have a couple that I wanted to address. So one comment was around the open-ended questions, that it's also special education can at time prompt behavior. Yes, exactly. So often Manuel is just explaining and reiterating what I was saying as far as special ed settings, that sometimes open-ended questions can at times prompt challenging behaviors, right? So while we in the regular ed setting want children to respond with more than a yes or no answer, right? We want them to use their vocabulary and practice that response skill. Sometimes that can prompt a behavior in a child if they're not confident in responding, or if they're not confident in their own speech, or if they have delays in their speech. So in those scenarios, a yes-no question would be more appropriate. Another question, is class just used for public pre-K, or is it used for older grades as well? Great question. So the class tool is developed for birth through 12th grade, Marcy, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So the pre-K tool is specific for pre-K. And then above that, they have one that spans K through 3rd grade, which doesn't look entirely different. However, it's a whole nother set of training and reliability that the observer needs to go through. We also use that in some of our kindergarten classrooms that are doing a specific grant work for us right now. And then it spans, I believe, 4th, 6th, and so on, all the way up through 12th grade. So a lot of districts ask if this can be used as your PEPG, your professional, acronyms, professional educators performance. It's when the administrator comes in to evaluate your performance in the classroom. Okay? And currently it's not an approved system for that. However, I would argue that it's largely beneficial for all grades, and I think would make a great option for that, because it's looking at really specific interactions and not just lesson plans, not just daily schedules, not just classroom setup, right? It's going deeper than all of those things. I definitely want to take any other questions or comments. Is anybody that's attending today live, have you had a class observation? Are you familiar with the tool? It's developed and published by a company called Teachstone. And I'm just logging into my Teachstone account right now. I have access to some high quality videos to show you exactly what it means. If you can kind of picture it, the class tool itself is sort of the umbrella. And then, nope, sorry, I'll put it in the comment box.
I just did that.
Okay, thank you. Class itself is sort of the umbrella, and then under that, like Marcy has just explained to us, it looks at those 3 domains of interactions, and then from underneath those, it breaks down even further into the 10 specific dimensions, and that's the way it's organized for all of them.
I think it's also important to note that each dimension, and again, this was an overview, but each dimension also has a number of indicators under it. So if we're looking at productivity, which is in the 2nd domain, classroom organization, it's maximizing learning time, routines, transitions, preparation, and then under those, there are a number of indicators that we look at and then use to put you in a range, whether it's mid, high, or low, including, provision of activities, choices when finished, fewer disruptions. Basically, with productivity, it's having brief, explicit follow-through, learning opportunities with transitions, and having materials and activities being ready for children, so they're not waiting. So there's not any, teacher executive time taken away from the learning time.
Yes. And our purposes with using this in the public schools is simply just to, certainly as a way to measure quality, certainly the quality of interactions. And while the tool itself, when used to full fidelity, it does produce scores that Marcy mentioned back in the beginning, we don't tend to give those scores to the teachers. We found that it causes a lot of stress and anxiety. That is not something that we want to do as monitors and as visitors in your classroom, right? So we use it as a tool to provide really specific feedback to the teachers and the ed techs and any other folks that have regular communication and interaction with the students. So it gives us a really clear picture. Like Marcy was saying, it covers about 2 hours of time in the classroom. So we get a really good snapshot of what's happening. And the beauty of this tool is you can't fake it. So if we go in to observe in a classroom and the teacher is sort of putting on a show, for lack of a better explanation, we know. The children tell us through their response and interaction, right? So like, Miss Nicole, why are you doing it that way? You never say please, right? Like their reactions to how you're sort of staging yourself always comes out. So we can't be fooled. So that's one thing that I love about this, using this in the classroom, is I know when I'm done and walk out of that 2-hour observation, whether or not that was a typical or non-typical day. And I also always ask the teacher that, how did today go for you? Is this what you experience day in and day out? If not, how come? Like, right, knowing that, of course, my presence or Marcy's presence in the classroom is bound to stir up some things, lots of questions. We always get asked, are you so-and-so's mom? Or are you here to pick up so-and-so, right? We're trying to just like stay in the back, like pretend we're not here, we're just trying to watch. So I know that that causes in and of itself a sort of a margin of error maybe. But beyond that, I'm always curious to know the teachers and her assistant teachers sort of reactions to us being there and reactions to how the day went. And then once that's said and done, once Marcy and I have had a chance to review our notes and complete the tool, then we're able to give very specific feedback to the teacher. So it's not uncommon for me to write back and say, you know, your positive climate evidence was through the roof. I saw lots of smiling, lots of high fives, lots of you know, eye contact, getting at the child's level, lots of positive communication and respect. So no changes needed, right? Keep doing what you're doing. But it's not uncommon nationally for those last 3 dimensions, the concept development, quality of feedback, and language modeling, to fall in the low range. A lot of adults struggle with interacting with children, and that's totally normal, and that's totally okay, because sometimes we simplify it too much. When we've been talking about, you know, use simple language, but be direct and be clear. And that's where that is going to show up. So if your feedback to a child stops a conversation versus prompts them to keep going in response, that's going to show up, and that's going to be evidence either for or against quality of feedback. So I find myself often talking with teachers about their interactions and how to potentially improve that. Concept development is another big one. That's your why, your how, your tell me more, how did you get to that, you know, conclusion, and really probing the child for more concrete response. That's one that is commonly a very low scored. So we give the teachers that really specific feedback, and we often let them know if they scored low, mid, or high. Some districts are lucky enough to have instructional coaches, so this is another really great opportunity for an instructional coach to be able to go in and provide specific feedback as well.
I just wanted to also mention, Deborah says that where she works, she's on a Head Start pre-K collaboration, and Head Start uses this tool almost not exclusively, but they generally do them twice a year, and then they actually have the federal Head Start comes in every 3 to 5 years to do class observations and scoring. And with Head Start, these class observations actually work in a different way. So they are used in the 10% of the national scores are actually, it could possibly reduce their funding. So they look at it in a little bit different sort of a way than we do. We use it for quality programming, where they also use it as sort of part of their funding. How they figure that out.
Yes, it's very high stakes for Head Start folks.
Definitely. And I will reiterate also that nationally, if you wanted to Google, and I could do it right now, but the national Head Start averages are always posted every year. And I don't know if they have last year's up yet, 2018 up. But yes, the last dimension is always the lowest scoring, which is unfortunate. The first dimension is always the positive climate, and negative climate is always the highest scoring. But it's not uncommon to be in the low mid-range to high low range for the last dimension, including language, vocabulary, and concept development for instructional support.
Right. I was just floating around on my Teachstone site. There's lots of various not websites. There's lots of various videos, but they're not ones that I believe are available to the general public. So I won't be able to share them with you beyond today. But anyways, just letting you know what I was doing.
I'm trying to think. I don't think I have access to any that aren't shareable.
Yeah.
They're actually used for training purposes. There are exemplary videos that they show that are used for training purposes for observers who are going for their reliability. And unfortunately, we do have to sign a thing that says we will not share them.
Right.
Most of them.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Marcy, you do have more slides. I just didn't want to.
Yeah. I kind of went fast. I talk fast when I'm nervous, so I was like, oh gosh, it's only 1:15. What am I going to do? Does anybody have any questions or want to dig? We do have some time before we get to the last. There's only 2 or 3 slides left, but dig a little deeper on any of the dimensions: positive climate, instructional support, and classroom management, or have any scenarios they want to run by or have questions about or anything like that. We definitely have time to do that right now. And while you're thinking about that, I also, Nicole was talking about how when you go in to do an observation, and if you have teachers who, are teaching in a way they don't normally do, it is very easy to figure that out. And another thing that I wanted to talk about around that is part of children's talk and having them be able to encouraging them to take risks in the classroom. So if you have children who are at Circle and you have a teacher who generally is, they'll answer the question and then they'll be like, yeah, okay, or no, that's not right, but not give any explanation, not elongate that, not do any further learning around that. It's going to basically enable those children to not want to take that risk. So that's another part of how we can see that is children being able to take risks in the classroom, being able to answer questions, whether they're right or wrong. It's a very comfortable setting, and it's explained. The answers are explained. It's a really good guess, but that's not what I was thinking of, and here's why, depending on what the question is. That's just another really important thing to point out. So anybody have any questions or scenarios they want to discuss briefly?
This isn't a question, but I just looked up that website you were talking about, and it does appear to have a free webinar, Best in Class Coaching Teachers on the Class, in case anyone's interested.
Yes, thank you, Lynn. That is true. They're doing a bunch of, they have some that you have to actually pay for, but I think they are doing teacher webinars right now. And I think it's just teachstone.com, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in the chat box, Deborah brings up a good point around how this tool keeps us mindful about being at the child's level when we have those daily interactions. And it just reminded me too that it's truly what this tool measures, right? There are parts of the day and parts of our observations where how the children are treating each other comes into play as well. So if there's a small group of children interacting in the blocks and they're being respectful, using positive communication, showing that they have a strong relationship, then that can certainly be put down as evidence towards a positive climate. With that said, if that's happening, but that's happening because the teachers are over at the teacher's desk talking about a new recipe that they've discovered, then that matters too, right? So that's going to be put more towards like a lack of sensitivity or a lack potentially of language modeling or quality of feedback, because if the teacher's not physically there interacting, then there's not anything that we can get for those dimensions as far as evidence goes. So even though the way the classroom runs based on the children matters, it also comes into effect even more so about how the teachers are interacting. So just trying to reiterate the importance of that time and that talk that you as the adult have with the child.
Marcy posted a question: can anybody be a trained class observer or mostly administration personnel? For example, if she were applying to a management position, could she obtain, or could anybody obtain that as part of my list of certifications? I believe yes. What happens is you have to go to a class on class. So I think it's it might be a 3-day class. I'm not sure. I can't remember. So
Yeah.
2 or 3 days, 8 hours a day, and then at the end of it you need to take actually not at the end of the class, you have I think 6 weeks or so to take the test, which is 5 15 to 20 minute observations, and then code them and pass 80% to be reliable. It does have a substantial cost to it, and so if you were doing it on your own, that would be completely up to you. But if you were doing it as part of your, like if you wanted your administration to pay for that, it would be a conversation about how it would be used, I would imagine, that sort of thing, because of the cost around it.
Right. And then there's a yearly maintenance to that as well.
Yes, yes, there is.
So Alexandria has a great question. How do we as classroom support balance the responses to children and the curriculum of the classroom? So if there's an opportunity to use rich vocabulary with the students and use an instance as a teaching moment without taking away from the classroom teacher's lesson or story. So in response to that, if this is like during a centers time or outdoor time, or something that's an appropriate time to be interacting and talking, I would never tell a teacher to back away from a teachable moment. If an opportunity arises and you think that child's going to benefit from further discussion on that, then absolutely take it. I have a great example of that. I was in a classroom, pre-K classroom a few years ago, and in the water table, the teacher had water and then had various like fish in the water table, and I mean like sharks, whales, goldfish, you name it, tropical looking fish that wouldn't even necessarily live in the same like type of water or the same climate of water. Turtles, frogs, like any basically aquatic reptile was in this water tank. And one of the students was asking about this tropical looking fish, saying, what is this, right? We live in Maine with lakes. Some children may have had access to the ocean before, but certainly not all. And they're used to seeing trout, salmon, pickerel. My husband has lots of names for fish that he would be astonished at that I'm not calling them all to my mind right now. And then all of a sudden there's this like random tropical fish. So that's a teachable moment to have with that child. It has nothing to do with the curriculum. It has nothing to do with the teacher's lesson or the teacher's goal of the water table. However, that child walked away from that water table with something new. So what we did was we said, you're right, like that does look like a fish that we wouldn't typically see here in Maine, huh? This frog, this turtle, maybe if there's some goldfish or something is familiar to us. That's a different looking fish. I don't know what it's called. Let's go check out the library. I have a whole book on fish in the library, and working through the process of figuring out what that is called instead of saying that's a clownfish, just like Nemo. Right? So working through that process with the child, interacting with them around how to figure out what this is going to prove to be far more beneficial in the long run for them than just saying, avoiding that interaction and just telling them the answer, or avoiding it and just giving them the answer because it's outside of what the goal of the lesson was. So I would never turn away from a moment where something like that could be done.
I also just want to throw out there that I read the question a little bit differently. So a different view on that is if you are in like a circle, like a large group time, a circle time or a story time, or even small groups, and you're working with a small group with another teacher who's leading the group, I would say if I was coding that, if the teacher leading the group was not specifically listening to the student, that would be a little bit lower of a score. But if you are sitting there with the teacher and you're the support in the classroom or the support at Circle, it's completely, I would say, okay to say, oh, Miss Nicole, did you hear Baxter? He had an answer. Baxter, what did you say? Listen to his words, that sort of thing. And just to call it out in a very positive way so that that child is being observed, and he's feeling comfortable in taking that risk, putting his information out there, and he's also being acknowledged, which is a very positive thing. Baxter is my dog. He just looked at me like I was crazy when I said that. He's like, what? But yeah, but there's definitely very positive ways to do that. And another piece of it is, we talked about a positive affect and a positive environment. And a lot of that has to do also around teacher to teacher being positive with each other. So if you have a lead teacher or a support teacher who is not, who takes that as a negative, that may be an opportunity to have a discussion after class is over when the kids aren't there. But it's about also being respectful of teachers. So if there's a way to do that and be very respectful, acknowledge the child, acknowledge that he's trying, find the right answer, or give him more language or vocabulary or that sort of thing.
So I don't know about you, Marcy, but at the end of an observation, when I walk away and I'm reviewing my notes of what I've observed and the evidence that I've collected for these domains and dimensions, we always are encouraged to ask ourselves, and I encourage teachers to do this too, what was the experience of the child today? Right? And not just one specific child, but the group of children. What did they experience with the presence of the teachers? Or if you are the teacher, what did they experience with my presence today? How did our interactions go? Were they positive? Were they negative? Was I sensitive to their needs? Did they have a say in their activities and choices? Was I able to manage the classroom and students' behaviors? Were we productive? Was I prepared, right? And if the answer to some of those questions is no, or could have been better, then that's food for thought moving forward. That's food for thought for me, the observer, to give us feedback, and it's food for thought for the teacher and the assistant teachers in how to make an improvement moving forward, right? So if we're really great at greeting and interacting and having a positive climate, then I'm going to turn my focuses towards another part, like behavior management or productivity or concept development, whatever areas I wasn't confident in.
I also want to add, well, Vicki had a question about if there are districts that had not been visited for observations yet. And yes, I think that is true. I'm going to let Nicole speak to that because I'm fairly new still.
Mm-hmm. Let me just scroll up and find it. I was reading Manuel's, which I want to get to in a minute as well. Can you, who was it from?
Vicki Grattan.
There are districts that have not been visited. Oh yes, just wondering where DOE is with timelines. Oh yeah, so our goal, or written in rule, it says that we're to visit, or that every district will have a class observation once every 3 years. So this is my 4th, going into my 5th year at the job at the DOE, and I've only observed about half of the classrooms in the state. Now, mind you, I'm one person deep. We now have Marcy, so that's definitely going to help. But Marcy started the day schools closed, March 16th, so she hasn't been in there yet, even though she has a strong class background. So moving forward, I hope to increase those numbers. But even saying that we've only been in half of the schools, that's still about 200 classrooms. We try not to observe in September because that's a crucial time for students to be transitioning back and for communities to start to be built. It would be highly unfair if I went into someone's classroom the second week of school and sort of judged, for lack of a better word, their interactions, right? Because it looks much different. So we prefer to go October through May. For the same reasons in June, we don't go because schools are typically winding down. Some pre-Ks aren't even in session in June. So we want to be mindful of that. So right out of the gate, we're shortened. And then you throw in inclement weather days, you throw in holidays, and all these other reasons of why we possibly couldn't go. Another point to that is that class observations require so much focus and thought on behalf of the observer that what we call class fatigue is a real thing. So as soon as Marcy came on, I said, do not do more than 3 class observations in a week. And even 3 is a lot because of the level of feedback and the level of observation that it takes. You can get burnt out really quickly. So that again limits how many classrooms we're able to get in any given week. So if you've already had a class observation, then you're probably good for a little while. I wouldn't necessarily suspect or expect us to come in anytime soon. Our focus is primarily on classrooms that have not been observed yet, especially those that have been in existence since like the mid 80s and 90s in Maine. Those are the ones that we want to get in and be able to provide really usable feedback to.
I would also say, that being said, the principles of the class observation are things that you should be using every day in every interaction, and making more interactions in the classroom, whether you're being observed or not. It really, the aspects of this observation really are looking for what a quality program is and offering you, the list on the screen right now, offering you what that means to be a quality program. And so these aren't just things that you would use, you know, when you're having an observation, which unfortunately I have been in classrooms that do that. And it's unfortunate because they do a really good job for a day, and then, you know, the behaviors come back and that sort of thing. And it's hard to understand that. But, you know, when you're using the behavior management strategies that class is giving you, you are going to actually see behaviors that are lower in numbers because of all of the tools and the interactions and all the positivity that you're using. It's just also teaching the kids that the same sort of, does that make sense? The same sort of ideas, and you're modeling that, and they're learning that, and it's very important.
Yes.
I also wanted to say, before you get to Manuel's comment, there are curriculums out there that actually are very opposite than class. So if you are using the OWL is one of them, I think, or I believe that during story time, teachers are actually directed to not, the lead teacher is directed to not call on children and to not kind of interact with them, while the support teacher, that's what their job is to interact with children, which goes 100% against what class is asking you to do. So I think with those curriculums, I've always told people, in my opinion, it's really good to find a balance. So maybe you're not getting every single comment that the children are making during story time, but if you are taking a few and answering those and acknowledging those, that would be a really positive thing, as opposed to not acknowledging them at all, which some curriculums do give you that direction. So
yes, back to the chat box. There's 2 quotes, or 2 things I want to get to. So Manuel posted a really great example of doing a field trip in a forest once, and having some of the children had not experienced the forest before, and just being really proactive and bringing in items for students to experience before they're out in the real world with them. That's a great idea. And then the follow-up from that, which is a great question, and I'm so glad you asked. And he says random, but it's not random, Manuel, I promise. So the question is, what tools can the observer use to put the classroom teacher at ease during the observation days, so that you actually see the teacher at their best? So this is so difficult. So in my experience, and this is Nicole's school of thought, when I go into a classroom to observe, I do my very best to, first and foremost, I dress down. I do not dress in my heels. I don't wear my fancy shoes or my fancy pants or my best coat. I try and dress like I would if I was just a regular visitor in the pre-K classroom. That might be jeans, it might, certainly not a sweatshirt, but my presence matters. So if I show up and I'm in my heels and I'm all sort of, for lack of a better word, stuffy looking, certainly that's going to put the children and the teacher not at ease, right? And they're probably going to be off-put, like I'm there for not the right reasons. Another thing I always try and do is interact with the teacher before I even arrive. Typically that's through email. But, I try and just be lighthearted. It's going to be great. I try and say, on the day of as well. I'll always say, pretend I'm not here. It's so much easier said than done. Many class observers are recommended not to interact with children during the observation, which is impossible for me. I'm around adults more often than not, so when I'm in a pre-K classroom and I'm observing and a child comes up to me and needs help tying their shoe, you best believe I'm stopping what I'm doing and tying their shoe. I can't, it's not within my nature to say, I'm sorry, go ask your teacher, or I can't do that for you, go ask another adult, right? That's gonna set the children off, as far, not set them off behaviorally, of course, but certainly around, who's that lady, right? And like I said before, we always get asked, are you so-and-so's mom? And I'll say, no, do I look like them? Or I'll say, nope, I'm Isaac's mom. Not that they know Isaac, right? They don't, but I'll respond to them. I don't ignore their questions or ignore their eye contact, or, you know, half the time they'll come over and sit with me in the back of the room on my lap. And if that's what makes them feel comfortable with my presence, then so be it. You know, it is what it is. And the teachers will always ask me, should I introduce you or not? And I say, that's up to you to decide. If you think your children will be more comfortable knowing my name, by all means, introduce me. And you can just call me Nicole. Don't throw a Mrs. in front of it. Or if you think better off to just act like I'm not, like that, totally teacher's discretion. I let them drive the bus on that one. So I just work really hard just to make sure that everybody knows I'm not here to judge your performance. I'm not here to evaluate you. I truly just want to get a snapshot of what's happening in the classroom, and, you know, and how those children are experiencing public pre-K.
I also just want to throw out there that I might recommend, you know, not necessarily a formal introduction, but also maybe a little pre-teaching of before we come, just to say to the children, you know, remember tomorrow we're having a special visitor and she's just here to watch us, that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be like a formal, like, this is Marcy, you know, everybody say hello, because that does make the children a lot more interested. But also having a stranger in your classroom just walk in and sit there and watch you can put kids not at ease.
Yes.
And teachers not at ease. So if everybody knows it's happening, whether they know who the person is or, you know, that sort of thing, just a little pre-teach on that so they know there's going to be a stranger in the class.
Yes. Yeah, I always say, I just love pre-K so much, I just have to watch what you do, or, you know, and I always try and stay. So Vicki mentioned a good point that I forgot. I try and arrive early before students even arrive, so that I don't interrupt their works. I'm already there when they come in. So that gives me a chance also just to talk with the teacher and chat about, you know, how they're doing, what questions or uncertainties, anxieties they may have about the day. And then I always try and stay a few minutes after to play with the kids. Almost always it tends to be recess or centers time, or sometimes a meal time when I'm leaving. So I always try and stay, so that I'm not just there get out, right? I'm there, I'm part of your classroom, I'm getting a sense of how the days and the routines go. And now that I'm done collecting evidence, we're just gonna hang out and chat. Yeah, I wanna play Play-Doh with you. Oh, that's awesome, you made a cookie, I can make a pizza, right? Or yeah, I brought a snack from home too. Do you mind if I eat with you? And I hang out with them and just to sort of bring it to a better close than, you know, gotta go, thanks, bye.
So it's about 10 of. If there aren't any more questions at the moment, we can go to the next slide, which I think is very much the final slide almost.
Yeah.
So it's just a summary. So when which we've talked about a lot of this, but when working with pre-kindergarten age children, it really is all about the interactions. These positive interactions provide the modeling to students, their elongated learning opportunities, and stronger behavior management in the classroom environment. Talking with children, and we always say the general rule of thumb is to shoot for 5 back and forth exchanges when you're having conversations. It's a great way to bring in the open-ended questions. It's a great way to kind of get to know what the kids' interests are, that sort of thing. But shooting for 5 back and forth exchanges is actually making, I think 3 is technically a conversation, 5 is just best practice.
Yes.
Allowing them to do what they can with scaffolding is needed. So that's those little hints, little help if they need it, little hints when needed, that sort of thing. And then the open-ended questions again. And those are a few of the very important tools that we discussed. So go be classy.
Perfect.
So now, again, if we have any more questions or clarifications, the final slide is the link to your certificate. So again, if you have an iPad or a phone with your camera on, just point it at the QR code and it will bring up something to bring you to the link to the survey. If you're unable to do that, you can copy and paste the link into your browser, and that also should bring you the link for the survey. After you've complete the survey, making sure that you do have the correct session in there, which is the introduction or overview of class. Once you complete it and submit that, it will pop up another link that you follow, and that will bring you to your survey. And yes, I can put the link in the chat. It's just going to take me 1 second. I meant to have that all together, and of course I didn't.
I'm just going to escape out of it for a second so I can cut and copy it as well. Whoops.
Are you doing the
hold on, I'm just going to share a different screen. Just bear with me 2 seconds. There you go. And I will cut and copy this. There's the link in the chat box.
I was just going to do the same thing.
Perfect. Never really can do it enough. So if you're successful accessing the link, then great, you're free to go. If anybody's experiencing trouble, I'm happy to stay on for about another 6 minutes. Marcy and I have a 3 o'clock sharp meeting that we do need to end this for. So happy to stay on and navigate any difficulties you have until then.
And also, again, this was a fairly brief overview.